Have you ever stopped to think what would happen if someone trapped in an immobile body could hear and feel everything around them, but without being able to call for help? But before we start the story, leave a comment below and let us know which city you're watching from. It was a sultry summer morning, the sky painted a deep blue, with clouds so still that they seemed to watch the world in silence. In the distance, the sound of an old engine cut through the air. On the small red motorcycle, whose paint had seen better days, followed Clara, a young nurse recently graduated, with eyes full of dreams and a white uniform that contrasted with the dust of the road. Clara held the handlebars tightly while trying to calm her racing heart. It was his first day in the most important job of his life, the one that could change everything. A job that promised a lot of money, but that hid a secret that no one had told him. With each kilometer traveled, the simple houses gave way to large mansions, hidden by iron gates and high walls, as if they wanted to keep the world away. When she finally reached the top of the hill, Clara stopped in front of an imposing residence. 3 floors, huge windows, gardens so perfect that they looked like they were drawn by hand. It was as if he had arrived at a place where wealth touched every blade of grass. Clara turned off the motorcycle, took a deep breath and got off, taking off her helmet slowly, revealing her hair tied up in a simple way. Courage, Clara. You've made it this far. Now it's just a matter of taking the next step, she whispered to herself, trying to push away her fear. In front of the door, a security guard in a dark suit was waiting for her, serious as a statue. Without saying a word, he opened the gate, and she entered, as if crossing the threshold of an unknown world. As soon as she entered, the sound of her footsteps echoed on the marble floor, while Clara's eyes roamed the grandiose corridors. Everything was golden, silver, and noble wood. But at the same time, there was something cold there, a heavy, almost suffocating silence. Who was she going to take care of anyway? That was the question that had been swirling in his mind since he had accepted the mysterious job. The advertisement read, "We are looking for someone dedicated who can handle sensitive situations. Above average salary. Urgent." Nothing more. No explanation. It was then that a woman appeared at the end of the hallway. Tall, elegant, with a dark dress and the look of someone who has seen the world and despises everything below her. "You must be Clara, right?" the woman asked in a tone that mixed disdain and impatience. "Yes, ma'am." "Clara, nice to meet you," the nurse replied, trying to keep her tone polite. "Come." The woman turned around without waiting for an answer, walking ahead. There is no time for unnecessary conversations here. As they climbed a huge staircase, Clara observed the paintings on the walls, family portraits, serious men, women in fine clothes, children with sad eyes. It was as if the house carried the weight of entire generations on its walls. "First of all, I need you to understand something," the woman said, stopping suddenly and turning to Clara. "The man you're going to take care of, he doesn't talk, he doesn't move. It's in a complex, and you're just another try." Clara swallowed, her heart beating even harder. "And what's his name?" he asked in a low voice. Leonard von Bergen, a name that sounded as strong and imposing as the mansion itself. When she opened the bedroom door, Clara felt a chill down her spine. There, in a large, luxurious bed, surrounded by medical devices that flashed and beeped silently, was Leonard. A young man, handsome but with pale skin, his eyes half open, trapped in an endless emptiness. And then, as Clara approached, something impossible happened. For a brief second, she had the feeling that his eyes followed her, too fast to be sure. She blinked, confused. "Impossible," she murmured, more to herself than to him. But that look, even if perhaps a figment of her imagination, would be the beginning of a journey she could never have foreseen. A journey where love, courage, and persistence would need to fight against the silence of the soul. What would you do if you noticed that someone trapped inside an immobile body is trying to communicate with you? Would you stay? Or would he turn his back and go on with life? Clara, at that moment, did not know how to answer. But what she would choose in the coming days would forever change the fate of that mansion, that man and hers as well. Clara remained for a few minutes standing by Leonard's bedside, watching this man who seemed so far from life. His eyes, almost blacked out, stared at a fixed point, as if the whole world had disappeared for him. For a moment she felt a tightness in her chest, a strange feeling, as if that lost look was asking for help without a voice. She took a deep breath and approached more carefully, as if trying not to scare a butterfly perched on a flower. She looked at his face, and even without an answer said in a calm tone, "Hello, Leonard. My name is Clara. From today on, I will take care of you." There was no reaction, not a blink, not a movement of the lips. But she continued. Claire knew, from her own experience, that care does not begin only with medicines or dressings, but with touch, with presence. And she was determined to be that human presence he no longer had. Slowly she pulled up a chair, sat down next to the bed, and began to notice the little details. The sound of the respirator, the barely perceptible movement of his chest rising and falling, and the faint whistle of one of the monitors next to her. It was a cold, almost mechanical environment, as if Leonard's life was maintained only by wires and machines. Meanwhile, the words of the elegant woman who welcomed her earlier echoed in her mind. "He doesn't talk. He doesn't move. It's in a complicated state. You're just another try." But Clara did not believe in empty attempts. Something inside her said that behind that motionless body was a soul screaming for help. Then, with the delicacy of someone who cradles a newborn, Clara took Leonard's hand between hers. His skin was cold, lifeless, but she didn't care. He held firm, as if to say, "You are no longer alone. You know, Leonard," he began to speak as he gently massaged his fingers. "When I was a child, my mother used to say that touch has power. He said that when you hold someone's hand, it's as if you were saying from the heart, 'I see you, I'm here.'" She smiled even without getting any look back. "Then I'll do that to you. I'll hold your hand every day, until you remember what it's like to be alive." Clara looked around the room. It was a beautiful place, but without heat. No photos, no flowers, nothing to show affection. Everything there screamed loneliness. That's when she decided she would change that. He didn't know how yet, but he would make that room a space of hope, not death. The next day, early in the morning, Clara returned to her room with simple flowers bought in the small flower shop she found on the way. He arranged them in a makeshift vase and placed them near the window so that the sunlight could touch them. Then he brought a small radio, one of those old ones, which played soft music. He turned on the device and let a quiet melody fill the oppressive silence of the room. He sat down next to Leonard, took his hand again and said, "Today I brought you music. Maybe you don't hear me. Maybe you don't feel my touch, but sound can reach places where you can't even imagine." As the song played, she began to tell stories of her life. She talked about her childhood, how she decided to be a nurse after taking care of her grandfather, who also spent years sick, tied to a bed. He said that, despite everything, he believed that no one should be forgotten or abandoned. "My grandfather was like that too, standing still, not saying anything. But, you know, I always imagined he could hear me. That's why I talk to him every day. And now, Leonard, I'm going to do the same with you." That afternoon, something curious happened. As Clara wiped Leonard's face gently with a warm cloth, she felt as if his fingers had moved slightly. It wasn't a strong movement, nor clear, but enough to make her heart race. She stopped, looked at him and smiled. "If you were the one who moved, Leonard, know that I noticed. There's no need to be in a hurry. I'll wait as long as it takes." Later, as she left the room, Clara crossed paths again with the elegant woman, who gave her a cold and suspicious look. "Have you wasted your time?" he asked ironically. Clara took a deep breath, not wanting to get into conflict. "No one is a waste of time, ma'am," and he went on his way with the certainty that even without proof, he had taken the first step to reach that man that everyone had already forgotten. That night, lying on her small bed in the servants' room, Clara looked up at the ceiling and thought, if love can't reach you, nothing else can. And so it was that day after day, with sweet words, gentle touches, and a constant presence, Claire began to build, brick by brick, an invisible bridge made of compassion, capable of reaching where no one else dared. Because sometimes all one needs to start coming back to life is to know that someone is there. Someone who cares. What about you? Do you believe that true affection can wake up even the most asleep souls? With each new day that Clara crossed the immense corridors of that mansion, the more she felt the weight of the environment around her. It wasn't just the cold silence or the lack of joy. It was something deeper, as if every wall, every golden chandelier, and every old picture watched her with invisible eyes, reminding her that she didn't belong in that world. Even wearing the white uniform and passing by with an upright posture, Clara knew that for the owners of the house, she was nothing more than one more. Just another employee, one more piece in the luxurious setting, someone who could be replaced without warning. It was evident in the distant look of the woman who hired her, Mrs. Helena, who never called her by name. She always used nurse, as if naming Clara was recognizing her as human and not as a simple service provider. "Nurse, don't forget to keep the curtains drawn. We don't want visitors to think Leonard still needs care," Helena said one morning with a coldness that made Clara shudder. "What do you mean?" thought Clara. "Why hide your own husband, tied to a bed as if it were a shameful secret?" But she knew the answer. In that world where money buys status, luxury cars, and glamorous parties, weakness has no place. Showing a loved one in suffering would be, for that family, a stain on the perfect image they wanted to display. As she organized Leonard's medicines, Clara remembered the streets she came from, the simple houses, where pain and joy shared the same roof, where no one hid the problems of life. There in the mansion, everything was disguised by fake smiles and expensive rugs. However, the worst prejudice did not come only from Mrs. Helena. The house's own employees, for the most part, avoided talking to Clara. Maybe for fear of losing her job, or maybe because, unlike them, she had arrived from outside without knowing the silent rules of that place. On one of those days, while having a hurried coffee in the kitchen, Clara heard two maids whispering near the stove. "This new nurse thinks she's going to change something," one murmured, her eyes suspicious. "Yes. Little does she know that the boss has been like this for months, and no one has ever achieved anything," replied the other, shaking her head in disapproval. Clara pretended not to hear, but inside she felt her heart tighten. It wasn't just the challenge of caring for Leonard that pressed on her. It was also the invisible barrier that separated who belonged in the mansion and who just served in it. She knew she had entered a minefield, where no matter how hard she tried, there would always be those looks that said, "You'll never be one of us." Still, every time he held Leonard's hand, it all lost importance, because at that moment, between her and that sleeping man, there was no wealth, no power, no titles. There was only one human being taking care of another. One afternoon, Clara decided to bring new flowers to the room. Simple flowers from a humble garden, but full of color and life. When she placed the vase next to the bed, Helena suddenly entered, frowning at the sight of the arrangement. "What's that?" he asked, crossing his arms impatiently. "Flowers, ma'am. To make the environment lighter, more humane," Clara replied, with a shy smile. Helena approached and, with a sudden gesture, moved the vase away from the table. "This house does not need humanization, nurse. It needs order. If you want to decorate, do it in your bedroom, not here." The words cut deeper than Clara wanted to admit, but she held her head high, not allowing the humiliation to bend her. "With all due respect, ma'am, but maybe Leonard does need a little life in here," he replied, softly but firmly. Helena stared at her for a long moment, then turned and left without saying anything else. That was the first time that Clara realized how much her simple presence was, for that house, a challenge. Not only because she was a simple woman, but because she brought something that everyone there had forgotten: compassion. That night, as she changed Leonard's sheets, Clara spoke softly, as she did every day. "You know, Leonard, the world outside is full of people like me, who don't have much, but who would give anything to see someone smile again. Here it seems that the smile died a long time ago, but I won't give up on bringing you back." She ran her hand through his hair with affection, and even without an answer, she felt that this gesture was worth more than any words. Because, in that mansion where money spoke louder than the heart, the simple act of caring for someone with love was an act of courage. And maybe, just maybe, it was this love that would one day make Leonard open his eyes again. The following days turned into a quiet and challenging routine. Clara, with her infinite patience, remained firm in her purpose, to find a way to Leonard's heart, even when everything and everyone seemed to say otherwise. Each dawn brought the same scenery: the spacious room, the carefully made bed, and that motionless man trapped inside a body that refused to react. But if the world around him had given up, Clara was the only one who still believed. "Leonard, the sun is beautiful outside today," she said as she opened the window, allowing the warm morning light to invade the cold room. "I don't know if you can feel the heat, but I'll do everything so that one day I can see you again." Even without hearing an answer, even without a simple blink of an eye that confirmed her presence, Clara continued. She talked to him about everything, what she saw on the street, the sound of birds in the garden, even the childhood memories she kept in her chest. There was something about Clara that made her believe that, behind those lost eyes, there was still someone fighting to get back. It was as if hope lived inside her, like a small flame but impossible to extinguish. However, with each failed attempt, the weight of doubt tried to invade his heart. One night, after giving Leonard a bath, Clara sat down next to him and with her head down whispered, "Sometimes I wonder if I'm wrong, if I'm trying to reach someone who may never come back." She held his hand tenderly, feeling the chill of that pale skin. But, as he always did, he pushed away the bad thought and smiled even with teary eyes. "But you know, Leonard, I promised I won't abandon you, and a promise is a promise." The next morning, Clara arrived at the room with something different, a small music box she had found in the mansion's library. He turned the key, and a soft melody began to play, filling the room with delicate notes. She approached Leonard, placed the box near the bed and muttered, "I brought you some music. Maybe it reaches places that my words can't." As the music filled the space, Clara watched attentively, waiting for any sign, a finger movement, a blink, anything. But silence was the only answer. Even so, she was not discouraged. He felt that there was something invisible happening there, something that only time would reveal. Over the days, Clara began to create small rituals. Every morning she opened the curtains, let the sun in and talked about what she saw outside. During the afternoon she read aloud storybooks, changing the voices of the characters as if she were narrating to someone who listened attentively. In the evening, he would tell how the day had been, always ending with a warm good night and a soft touch on Leonard's hand. As much as his body didn't react, Clara was sure that his soul was still there, somewhere, waiting for a reason to come back. Even with the coldness of the other employees, even with the contempt of Mrs. Helena, Clara did not change her attitude. He knew that to fight against the impossible, it was necessary to persist every day, like someone who plants a seed and waits for it to grow, even without knowing if the land is fertile. In the late afternoon, after days of dedication, something unexpected happened. As she adjusted Leonard's pillow, telling a funny story from when she was a child, she heard a faint, barely audible sound. It was like a whisper, an attempt at sound that barely formed. Clara stood still, her heart racing. "Leonard?" he called in a trembling voice, leaning towards him. For a moment she thought she saw a slight tremor on his lips, as if they wanted to move, but they couldn't. She put her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race. "I heard, Leonard. I know it was you." Although nothing else happened at that moment, that small, almost imperceptible sign renewed Clara's strength. It was proof that his hope was not in vain. That night, back in the simple room she occupied in the mansion, Clara looked out the window, seeing the dark sky dotted with stars. With a slight smile, she muttered to herself, "It's worth continuing. One day he will return." Meanwhile, Helena, on the other side of the house, looked at papers and numbers, concerned only with money and the image that the family projected to the world. To her, Leonard was nothing more than a problem to be solved in time, and Clara was just another dreamer, lost within the high walls of that life of appearance. But in Clara's mind, the impossible was just something that took a little longer to happen, and she was willing to wait, even if everyone around her didn't believe it. Because for her, hope was like an invisible thread that still connected Leonard to life. And she would never let go of that rope, even if her hands were injured on the way. And you, if you were in Clara's place, would you continue to fight against the impossible? Or would he accept what everyone had already accepted as definitive? Clara walked through the corridors of the mansion with light steps, as if she did not want to disturb the silence that dominated the place. The house was so big and beautiful on the outside, but on the inside it hid a void that was difficult to explain. Nothing there seemed alive. The expensive carpets, the walls decorated with old paintings, and the luxurious furniture were immersed in a frightening stillness, as if even time had stopped. From the first day, Clara felt that this place was not just a house, It was a prison, not for her but for Leonard, who was stuck not only in his own body but in everyone's oblivion. As much as there were servants, cooks and security guards, no one seemed to really care about the owner of that mansion. Everyone did their work mechanically in a hurry, avoiding spending too much time near the room where Leonard was. To them, he was just a burden, a reminder of what the family had lost. One day, while passing through the kitchen, Clara heard two employees talking quietly, not knowing that she was nearby. "I don't know why they still hire nurses. This man is not coming back," said one of them, shaking his head. "I don't understand either. His wife gave up a long time ago." "That room is just a place to wait for the end," replied the other as he washed his hands. Their words echoed in Clara's mind. How could someone be treated as a problem, as if they were already dead? That left her with a heavy heart. Later, when she re-entered Leonard's room, she watched him more closely. He was there, motionless, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if they were part of him. For a few seconds, Clara wondered what was going on behind that blank stare. "It must be horrible to feel alone like that, Leonard," he murmured, moving closer to the bed. "Even surrounded by people, I was still completely isolated." She held his hand gently and continued, "You know, I know what it's like to feel lonely too. I lost my parents early. I grew up with my grandmother, and she taught me that even when the whole world forgets about us, love can keep us going." Clara noticed that Leonard did not receive visitors. Since she arrived, she had never seen anyone enter there, apart from her and doctors who seemed more concerned with papers than with the man in bed. Not even Helena, the wife, showed up to see her husband. On a rainy afternoon, when the sky was covered with heavy clouds, Clara sat next to Leonard, watching the rain hit the window. "Look, Leonard, even heaven is crying today." She smiled sadly. "Sometimes I feel like crying too." She realized that there were no photos in the room, no memory of happy moments, only the medical devices and the cold walls, as if they wanted to erase any trace of the life he once had. "Why did they leave you like this, Leonard?" she asked, more to herself than to him. "Where are your friends? Your family?" Deep down, Clara knew the answer. Money can buy many things, but it does not buy true love. And perhaps, when Leonard needed it most, everyone who claimed to be friends disappeared. It was then that she made a decision. If no one wanted to be by his side, she would be that person, not out of obligation, but out of humanity. The next day, Clara returned to the room with something special. She had bought a small frame with her own money and put up a picture of herself smiling. It wasn't arrogance, it was an attempt to bring some affection to that cold space. "I brought this to you." She put the picture on the table next to the bed. "That way you'll remember that there's someone here who won't abandon you." Clara knew that even if he couldn't see it, the gesture meant a lot. It was her way of saying, "You matter." One night, as she adjusted Leonard's blanket, Clara leaned over and whispered, "It doesn't matter how long it takes, Leonard. I'm going to stay here. Even if the whole world has forgotten you, I won't do the same." She leaned her head on his arm for a moment, seeking the strength to continue. It was not easy to fight against silence and indifference, but she knew that behind that lost look, there was still a soul that deserved affection. The mansion, with all its grandeur, was nothing more than a castle of solitude. Clara, with her quiet courage, was the only light in the midst of the darkness. The days passed, and Clara remained steadfast in her mission to reach Leonard's sleeping heart. Each morning she walked into his room with a smile, even if inside she carried the weight of fighting alone against the silence of that house. But what Clara didn't know was that even if Leonard's eyes didn't follow his movements and his lips didn't form words inside him, something was beginning to awaken. Clara had learned from life that not everything needs to be said to be felt. Therefore, he decided to use not only his words, but also small gestures to try to bring Leonard back to the world of the living. So it was that, on a clear, sunny morning, she came into the room bringing something new, a small box of old music, which she had found in a forgotten corner of the library. The object seemed to have belonged to someone important, perhaps from the von Bergen family itself, as it was well cared for but dusty, as if no one had touched it for years. Delicately, Clara turned the key in the box and a soft, nostalgic melody filled the room. The notes floated through the air, and for a moment she noticed that the environment seemed less heavy. "Listen, Leonard," she murmured, sitting next to him. "Music has the power to touch the heart, even when it is hidden deep inside." She watched his face, looking for any sign of reaction. For a second, she thought his eyes moved slightly, as if they wanted to follow the sound. But maybe it was just your imagination, or maybe a first step. That night, Clara wondered how she could find other ways to reach Leonard. It was then that he remembered something he had heard from Mrs. Helena in a telephone conversation as she hurried down the hallway. He always wanted to have one of those grey cats, but I never allowed it. Cats shed hair. That ignited an idea in Clara's mind. The next day, when she went on her break, she walked to a small animal market and, with the little money she had saved, bought a grey kitten with soft fur and green eyes that looked like emeralds. When she arrived at the mansion, she snuck in with the small animal wrapped in a blanket, afraid of Helena's reaction. He quickly went upstairs and, when he closed the bedroom door, he released on Leonard's bed. "Look, Leonard. I brought a friend to keep you company," he said, smiling, as the kitten approached with shy and curious steps. To Clara's surprise, the cat climbed gently on Leonard's chest, lying there as if it were his home. The soft purr filled the space, creating a new melody, this time lively and warm. "I think he liked you," Clara whispered, as she ran her hand over the blanket, which now nestled over Leonard's heart. At that moment, something changed. A slight movement on his eyelid. Small, almost imperceptible, but enough to fill Clara's heart with renewed hope. "I saw it, Leonard. I saw you react," he exclaimed with a genuine smile, feeling the tears welling up with emotion. Determined to continue, Clara thought about how to complete this ritual of rapprochement with the world, and it was then that he remembered another passion he had heard in the conversations of the house. Leonard loved horses. He had an imposing black horse, which no one had ridden since the accident. The next afternoon, when Mrs. Helena left for an appointment, Clara went to the stables of the estate. There he was, the horse that had once accompanied Leonard on so many rides, strong, elegant, but with sad eyes, as if he also missed his owner. "You must miss him, don't you?" Clara asked the animal as she ran her hand over its mane. That's when she had a new idea, to make the horse appear in front of Leonard's window. Perhaps seeing his longtime friend, Leonard's sleeping heart remembered what it was like to be alive. With the help of the handler, she took the horse to the garden, right in front of the bedroom window. He opened the curtains slowly, and with a smile said, "Look, Leonard, who came to see you?" The horse stood still, staring intently at the window, as if he recognized the friend he had not seen for so long. Clara, looking at Leonard, had the impression that his chest moved more strongly, as if that silent reunion was awakening something long forgotten. She approached him, held his hand, and whispered tenderly, "See, you're not alone. Me, your cat, your horse. We are all waiting for you to come back." At that moment, Clara was sure of one thing. No matter how long it took, she would continue to bring Leonard all the pieces of life he loved. Because true overcoming, she knew, did not come from grandiose miracles, but from small gestures that, added together, were capable of rebuilding even the most wounded soul. And so, between a soft melody, the purr of a cat, and the gaze of a faithful horse, a new hope began to emerge in that previously forgotten room. Clara had already lost count of how many days had passed since she first set foot in that mansion. All she knew was that every morning when she opened the door to Leonard's room, she carried the hope that this would be the day he would wake up. That morning, Clara arrived early, as usual. The sun was still shy in the sky, and the house was silent, like a sleeping giant. He entered the room and approached the bed. "Good morning, Leonard," she said, her voice soft, adjusting the sheets around his body. The little grey cat, now a faithful companion, jumped from his chair to the bed and lay down next to Leonard, purring softly. Clara smiled at the animal's gesture. "See, you already have someone who won't let you, and I won't let it either." Suddenly, as she was wiping his face with a warm cloth, something happened. Leonard blinked. It was not an involuntary wink. It was a firm movement, as if he wanted to show that he was there. Clara froze, with the cloth still in her hand, her heart racing. "Leonard, are you listening to me?" This time he blinked again. Tears flooded Clara's eyes, but she kept calm, moving closer to the bed. "If you can hear me, blink one more time, please." And he blinked. Slow, but clear. Clara put her hands to her mouth, holding back her tears. After so long, he was there, conscious. "Oh my God, Leonard, you're back," she mumbled, holding his hand tightly. She knew she needed to act fast. She ran to the phone and called the family's private doctor, insisting that he come immediately. A short time later, the doctor arrived, followed by Helena, who was notified by message. The woman rushed in with a skeptical look. "What's going on? Why this urgency?" Helena asked impatiently. Clara did not answer. He just looked at Leonard and said firmly, "Show her, Leonard." With effort, he blinked once more, and this time he tried to move his fingers slightly, as if he were struggling to break the prison of his own body. The doctor quickly approached, examining Leonard with attentive eyes. "Incredible," whispered the doctor. "He's conscious. It is trying to react." Helena widened her eyes in surprise, unable to say a word. Clara then turned to her with a serious tone. "I told him he was here, that he could hear us. You chose to give up, but I chose to fight." Helena, visibly shaken, took a step back, swallowing. In the following days, the mansion, once so silent, became a center of movement. Doctors came and went, bringing devices, specialists and therapists. But for Clara, the most important thing was to see Leonard's small progress. He began to move his eyes, following Clara around the room. Then he managed to move his hand a little, lightly touching her fingers. On a special afternoon, while Clara helped him to sit in the wheelchair, he tried to pronounce the first word. It was difficult. The voice came out weak and almost inaudible, but Clara managed to understand. "Clara." She smiled, teary-eyed, and held his face with both hands. "I'm here, Leonard. I always have been." News of the miracle soon spread. People who had never cared began to visit the mansion, curious, shocked by the recovery. But Clara knew the truth. They didn't really care. They were just there to see what they could gain. Helena, realizing that she would no longer have full control over her husband's fortune, became increasingly uncomfortable with Clara's presence. In a tense conversation, the woman was direct. "Now that he's getting better, you're no longer needed. You can leave." Clara stared at her firmly, without hesitation. "I'll ask him." She turned to Leonard, who, with great effort, shook his head in denial. "No," he murmured, his voice still weak but clear. "Stay." Helena lost her color. There was nothing more to say. As the weeks passed, Leonard was able to start feeding himself with the help of Clara and, in a short time, to speak whole sentences. On a sunny morning, sitting on the porch with Clara by his side, he took her hand and said, "If you hadn't believed me, I would never have come back." Clara smiled, shaking his hand back. "You've always been here, Leonard. You just needed someone who wouldn't leave you alone." It was there at that moment that Leonard looked into her eyes, with a look full of gratitude and emotion, and said, "I want you to stay forever." Clara laughed, with tears in her eyes. "I don't intend to go anywhere." And so from a man everyone thought was lost, Leonard was reborn. Not because of expensive machines or medicines, but because someone believed in him when no one else did. Today, Leonard has not only returned to life, but has turned his experience into a purpose. He created a foundation to help people in a similar state to the one he faced, ensuring that no one else went through what he went through. And by his side, always Clara, now not only a nurse but a life companion. Because in the end, what saved Leonard was unconditional love, persistence, and real care, something no amount of money could buy. Now tell us, what did you think of Leonard and Clara's story? Leave your opinion in the comments. If you liked it a lot, and if you want to contribute to our channel, leave a super thanks. Any amount already helps us a lot. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our stories. And don't forget to check out more exciting stories by clicking here on the final screen. See you next time.